Welcome back to the Breaking the Plane podcast. It's our third episode. Dustin is here with me, and football season, off season, it's the toughest. We've got you covered. We are going to be going through one division per week, and I was thinking, what division should we start with? Lots of changes this off season, lots of exciting draft picks coming in, but when I think about, young quarterbacks and interesting quarterback rooms and how are they going to develop, I think of the NFC South, and who better to talk to about the NFC South than Dustin, our resident Panthers fan. How you doing today, Dust?
I'm fantastic.
Yeah, so Dustin's ready. He was already talking Panthers football earlier today. We're going to let you open this. Tell us about the Panthers, your outlook for next season on Carolina.
Yeah, so this next season is going to be interesting, and I view it as a hopeful increment to getting better. Last season was terrible, and we didn't have a lot of talent around. We traded away our best receiver, our best talent on our offense, to get Bryce Young, and the whole thing with the Panthers was we kept thinking we were a quarterback away, or at least our owner kept thinking we were a quarterback away. However, last year clearly proved we were not a quarterback away. And I mean, you could see it like through the previous seasons as well. We had issues besides the quarterback position. Now, I will say that the Panthers did try to make some moves this year. They did. Unfortunately, they're a bad team, and a bad organization, or they're at least perceived as a bad organization now. So they had to
ownership?
Yeah, they had to overpay for some of the free agents they brought in.
So that's really the thing that worries me about the Panthers is David Tepper. As a Jaguars fan, we know what happened to that Jaguars-Panthers game, and Dustin and I were diehards. We are almost always at the Jaguars-Panthers game, but it was weird this year. It was over New Year's. We couldn't go.
Yeah.
But David Tepper, from his suite, throws a drink on a Jaguars fan. This guy thinks he can do whatever he wants. I would hate for my team to be run by this guy. Like, Dan Snyder finally exits the league and does everyone a favor, and in comes this dude.
Yeah.
I mean, how, as a Panthers fan, are you feeling about the impact that this guy is going to have on your franchise?
Oh, depressed as heck.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't give you a good hope for the future because they haven't had a winning season with him as the owner yet. And he is able to make aggressive moves. I'll give him that. Like, when he thought that they were competitive, we made aggressive moves like Stephon Gilmore and bringing Cam Newton back.
A C.J. Henderson was a great trade that the Panthers made with the Jags.
Yeah, just got completely burned by Mike Evans for three touchdowns in that game where we could have won the division from the Bucks, but...
Yeah, but optimistic Panthers fan, how many wins this season? What do you think?
7 is best case.
7 wins.
So absolute best case scenario, I would be over the moon if we got 7 wins.
Okay, tell me. So this is your best case scenario. You've got your Panthers fans watching this too. They know you're a diehard. How do the Panthers get to 7 wins?
They get to 7 wins by their new coach, Dave Canales, which I've grown to like a little bit more as I've been listening to how his philosophy brings towards the
So tell me
team.
more about the coach, because this is a blind spot for me. I felt like my position as an outside fan, the Panthers couldn't get anyone interested in the job. So I'm like, Dan Canales, never heard of this guy. It's not Danny Cannell. I know he used to be a Giants quarterback in the 90s. But Dan Canales, tell me about him.
Yeah, so it's Dave Canales. But
Dave Canales, sorry.
Yes.
But I was even more off.
And it's interesting that you say that because I was kind of the same thing. I knew nothing about him. And I was like, this is my stand as a Panthers fan. I was so depressed, like, after last year and all the firings and stuff. I'm like, I don't really care. As a coach, it's not going to matter.
You filled the open rec.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think with the league being an offensive-driven league, you need to have an offensive-driven coach, and I think that Dave Canales has some of those credentials. Especially the major reason he was brought in is because he's good at getting the most out of his quarterbacks. Now, we've heard of other coaches who supposedly are good at that too, like Adam Gase and whatnot.
And then we've heard of others, you know. Brian Dable did a great job at Josh Allen.
This is true.
So it could work.
Work.
Is this like a risk on younger talent? like aspiring talent? What do you think?
A risk on it?
Yeah, is this like more of like you're taking a risk on like a up and comer?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it could pay off.
It
That's
could.
probably
Or
the right
he
move
might
to make.
be in over his head like Matt Rule was.
Yes.
But he engages the players well, and the major credentials he has are in the past 2 seasons he was able to help Geno Smith on the Seahawks. He was the quarterbacks coach in Seattle, I believe.
That's
and then
great.
he was offensive coordinator for the Bucks when Baker Mayfield was able to turn things around.
So that's a great track record.
It is.
Yeah.
It's just with the ownership structure that the Panthers have, is he going to be able to do what he needs to be able to do to get the most out of Bryce Young? Or are they going to start 0-2 and Tepper's trying to kick him out the door already?
Right. And I'm of a minority opinion that Frank Reich is actually a very good football coach. And Reich and his staff and Josh McCown and everybody, they wanted C.J. Stroud, and Tepper overruled him. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. He won't confirm that. He had a press conference where they were talking about that, and he would refuse to say that he overrode the decision of the coaching staff. But I mean,
the writing's on the wall.
Most people know that he did.
Yeah.
Because he
imagine if your team had C.J. Stroud playing the way he's playing. You
Right.
and I were aligned. We were not fans of Stroud as a prospect. We were in the Anthony Richardson camp, but still.
Yeah. Now you could make the argument that Stroud had young receiver talent, and they were able to stretch the field with that. Bryce Young had Adam Thielen,
Right.
so like, what receiving talent it had, and they did address that a little bit with getting Deontay Johnson, who's not great, but he'll at least give a little bit of youth to that, and he's a decent receiver.
Yeah, and he performed well for Pittsburgh. What else do you see from the Panthers this year as you look at like the, you talked about Deontay Johnson, but some of the other additions to the team that they've had?
Well, they also drafted Xavier Leggett, and they're giving him comps to Deebo Samuel. Now, I think he has some work that needs to be done before he can get to that spot.
Yeah.
But a player like that, if he is kind of a running back receiver hybrid, that's really an interesting piece to make a dynamic offense. And that's what I'm hoping Dave Canales can do, is to create an offense that Bryce Young can run. Because when Bryce Young was working with Frank Reich, there were all the reports coming out that he wasn't able to execute the offense well. And if Dave Canales can work with Bryce Young and create a system that he can run well, and I think that works. And having some more of these players who are younger skill players. I believe they have a tight end that they drafted. I think his name is Jadavian Sanders, but he's out of Texas, which sounded like he could be an interesting project.
Let's talk more about Bryce's height, though, like development next year. Like, how big of an issue is that going to be? That's a question in everyone's mind with Carolina.
Yeah,
how much of an impediment is that?
Oh, his actual height?
Yeah.
I think you have to do a lot of what you would do with Russell Wilson, and roll him out, get him moving in the pocket. You are not going to make Bryce Young a pocket passer like C.J. Stroud. He's just too small to do it. So you have to make sure, and he's also really small too, like not just height but also his frame. He's just tiny.
Yeah.
So you got to move him around, and I think that they weren't doing that last year. And if I can see them trying to incorporate more concepts like that, and they did overpay for some offensive linemen, Damian Harris and Robert Hunt. So hopefully that shores up the line, because he had no time to pass last year. And so hopefully a little bit extra blocking, you're able to run some more concepts. So kind of with that taken into consideration, like I said, my optimistic view is 7-10. Like absolutely like phenomenal season is 7-10.
Yeah.
I'm being a realist here. I'm thinking it's a 4-13 season.
Yeah, and I'm seeing less. Like, I'm seeing less fight.
I mean, they got 2 wins last year, being absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we're gonna see more of the same. So I have the Panthers with 2 wins, doing the 2-15 this year in the cellar. But are we in agreement? Even if the Panthers even that 7-10 Panthers, are they getting out of the cellar? Or are they just the seller, even no matter how well
I
they
think
do?
they're probably the seller. I mean, if they're 7-10, they might be able to compete with the Saints a little bit, but
That's depressing. Your ceiling is the cellar of the basement.
yeah. Hey, we got work to do with this roster.
Oh man. Well, as franchises, me being the Jaguars fan and him being the Panthers fan, his team has had a lot more success over the years. But right now, I'd much rather be in my team's position. I'll just say that.
The last 15 years, I'd rather be a Panthers fan. Just saying.
All right. Well, let's move on to the Saints. This team is just an enigma for me.
Yeah.
They've gone in very interesting directions, and to me, the Saints all hinge on Derek Carr. What are we going to see from him? I think last year he underachieved, and he'll settle into the system. So the Derek Carr that we see this year, he's going to be more acclimated. He's going to make more plays, and we'll see more signs of the Derek Carr towards the end of his Raiders tenure than we saw last year. What are your thoughts on Derek Carr?
I could see that. I think that you're bigger on Derek Carr than I am. I think he's always been kind of overrated. But he could probably run the offense well enough. Now, the problem is that I don't know if they're going to necessarily be offensive driven because their coach is very defensive minded in Dennis Allen.
Yeah.
And that showed last year because they had a top 10 defense. So I think that will continue. And since that's the case, I do really think, like to your point, it is how can Derek Carr take it to another level this year to help them be better, basically.
Yeah. How far ahead of the Panthers would you say the Saints are, just being in tune with your division?
Oh, I mean, they're definitely on a different tier.
Yeah.
The Panthers are on lousy tier. The Saints are on average tier.
Yeah, I feel like the Saints, if everything broke right, their ceiling would be scraping a 7 seed or something.
Yeah, they could scrape a 7 seed.
I could see that, but yeah, they're probably not going to be in the cellar. Carolina's so bad, and they'll be right in that mix. So if we're power ranking the Saints team, they're going to be floating between 15 and 22 all year, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
That's what I've got for them. Defensive side of the ball, though, are they going to be the best defense in this division?
The Bucks is pretty good.
Bucks have some stout defenders.
Yeah,
especially
but
the
I
front
mean,
seven.
I think you could argue it. I think I would probably at the end of the day go Bucks though.
Yeah.
They did add Chase Young on a 1-year contract though, so he
So
hasn't
much
lived.
potential.
Yeah, he hasn't lived up to his potential, but it's like they did a low risk 1-year contract on him. I think that it's worthwhile.
Yep. He's sort of turning into a poor man's Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah.
A high draft pick that you're like, maybe this will be the spot where he pans out.
But
I mean,
I would
that's a
say-
great comp, actually.
Yeah, I would say Jadeveon Clowney at least has served his role in those 1-year contracts.
Right. I love the Ravens year where Clowney was a beast.
Right,
Crazy.
right.
Yeah.
Chase Young, you just haven't really seen that. And who knows, maybe it's because he tore his ACL and just hasn't been able to get back to the dominating factor he was.
Yeah.
Or he just has a bad work ethic. It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah. So what's your outlook on the Saints?
So I have them at, like, floor is 7-10, ceiling is 9-8, kind of like you said, where it's like 9-8 is generally enough to get you a 7 seed in the playoffs, but I believe that there are teams that are better and it would be supersede them for the 7th seed.
Yeah, the NFC is weak. So
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And with a 17-week schedule or 18-week schedule, 17 games, it's going to come down to the wire, and there's so many teams that are alive. So the Saints should be one of those teams that's in the hunt in the last week but needs some help.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But the help could break the right way, and I could see them being a playoff team. The Saints I have on a range of 6 to 10 wins, but my prediction would be right at 7 and 10.
Yeah.
For the Saints. So significantly better than Carolina, winning both head-to-head. Sorry, Dustin. But most likely being on the outside of the playoffs, but if other teams don't show up like they're supposed to, they might just sneak in.
Yeah. Yeah, if other teams underachieve, they could have an opportunity.
Yeah. Are you ready to move on to Atlanta?
Yeah, let's talk about Atlanta.
So this team, okay,
Overhyped.
overhyped.
Yeah, because everyone's like, oh, they've got so many offensive weapons. It's like, well, yeah, there's Bijan, Kenyon Drake, and Kyle Pitts, but has Kyle Pitts lived up to his billing?
No,
at all?
he's Chase Young at the tight end position.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't see that changing with just putting Kirk Cousins in there. So I think Bijan is a good talent. Depends on if Raheem Morris uses him or not.
Yeah.
And running back is only so important now. I think that you need a running back who can run and receive in this league. The position's just evolving. And if you can't do both, then you're not as valuable. Now, I think Bijan can receive decently, but he's not like a Christian McCaffrey in the receiving game by any means.
Well, Bijan is a game changer. He can take over a game. So when I'm looking at McCaffrey, running and receiving can take over a game. Bijan, sure, more of a runner than receiver, but he can take over a game. He's dynamic. He's a playmaker. And a Deebo Samuel-esque skill set, you've said for some receivers, that's a playmaker. That's a game changer. It's something the defense just can't quite account for that's unique to their skill set. Bijan's got it. He's going to be one of the top 5 running backs in the league. The talent's there. What I like with Atlanta, Kirk Cousins coming in, the Michael Penix draft pick is one of the craziest things I've ever seen happen. They're probably viewing him as a developmental prospect. Keep him in the clubhouse for a few years, learn from Kirk, and the Falcons are tough for me to analyze. But I'm getting more Stafford to the Rams vibes on a relocate than I am a situation where Russell Wilson shows up in Denver where it just didn't work at all.
Yeah.
So you got Tom Brady joining the Bucs, they win a Super Bowl. Matt Stafford joining the Rams, they win a Super Bowl. This one, okay, I don't think Kirk Cousins is taking the Falcons to a Super Bowl, but it could be like divisional round of the playoffs, and that's definitely overachieving, I would think, for Atlanta.
For first year.
Final 4 in the NFC.
Yeah.
That's what divisional round is. You're top 4 out of 16, and they could get there, but a lot needs to break their way.
Yeah.
And this is Kirk's time. Kirk Cousins is the best business person who has ever been an athlete in the NFL in NFL history.
Yeah.
It's not even close. The way this guy has maximized the talent he has, which, sure, he's talented, but he's slightly above average.
Yeah.
And he's the 4th highest paid player at this point. Is that
I'd
is
have
that
to
correct?
look at the numbers.
But
he got a pretty good contract.
First ever fully guaranteed deal. Kirk, just go deliver. It was fun watching Kirk Cousins on the quarterback Netflix series.
It was, yeah.
Seeing him a little bit closer and how much he puts into the game. And there is something. It's not. I'm not comparing Brady. It's the Brady mentality of I know my skill set and I know what I can do. I'm going to be such a student of the game that I'm going to maximize every ounce of talent that I have and be the best I can be. And if he ratchets it up, if it was like, hey, my time in Washington was the, you like that phase. And maybe my time in Minnesota was, hey, I got over the hump. I won a playoff game. And then we had that big upset win over the Bills. And we had the plane ride back. And now the Falcons could be the third step of, now it's time to take charge, be the leader, and go get it.
Or it could be more of the same.
You know what? We got a lot of Falcons fans watching this channel. Don't listen to Oscar the Grouch over here. Your team's got potential. How about the defensive side of the ball? I mean, you're a Panthers fan. What are you thinking about that Falcons defense?
Yeah, I mean, Jesse Bates is a great safety.
Oh, he might be the best in football. Him or Derwin, right?
Yeah, no, he's playing really well. I think from what I've gathered, their secondary is a little weak.
Mm-hmm.
But I think defensively they're about middle of the pack. They're serviceable, but they're not going to be like outstanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you see Atlanta doing this season?
Yeah, so I see Atlanta really clawing for a wild card spot. I don't think that they're quite. I know they're the popular pick to win the division, but let's think about last year when, Derek Carr went to the Saints and they were the popular pick to win the division. I'm not buying it. I'm not going to fall for that this time. So I have the Falcons probably about 9 to 10 wins, I would say. I would say the ceiling is 11. Yeah. So I'd probably peg them at 10 and 7.
Being in such a weak division, that's going to give them
extra wins.
Yeah, it'll be a false positive wins. You'll see a team like, I don't know, give me like the Ravens or something, right? They might have like one less win than the Ravens, and the Ravens had a way harder schedule and are a way better team.
Win all of their division games. Then that's 6. Right
yes,
there.
so it's like the Ravens have maybe only one more win, but if they played head to head, would win 44-3.
Right.
It could be that kind of a scenario here. I see Atlanta being well in the wild card mix. I expect them to be in the wild card mix and probably to secure a wild card spot.
Yeah.
With everything they've got, it's a disappointment if they don't.
I would say so. If they don't, Kirk Cousins just couldn't come back from the Achilles injury.
Right. And the rehab is, I mean, we're looking at Kirk and we're looking at Aaron Rodgers coming back this year. It's going to be a test for these quarterbacks in their late 30s and, early 40s now for Aaron. How can they recover? Right?
Yeah.
Kobe was never the same after his Achilles.
Yep.
It's tough to overcome at that stage in your career. For Atlanta, I have them 8 to 12 wins.
Okay.
And the 12 is high just because they're in the NFC, and if they get hot, it could be good. I actually totally agree with your 10 and 7 though. That's my official pick. I got them at 10 and 7.
Yeah, I think they're not going to win the division, but they will be in that wild card race. 10 and 7 is definitely enough to get you a wild card in the NFC.
Yeah. Well, that takes us. We got one team left. Oddly enough, with this division preview, Dustin and I have the same order of teams.
Yeah.
We agree. This will probably not be a trend with our podcast. This is a rare division where we agree on the order everyone will finish. But we both agree the Bucks are at the top, and Dustin had no hesitation to put them there. So lead us off.
So I really liked what they did in the offseason. They had a lot of people coming up on contracts, and they had to make the decision on Baker Mayfield. They had to make the decision on Mike Evans, and they decided to pay them both. And based on the success you've had for the last couple of years, why wouldn't it, especially at the end of the year for the Bucks? The Bucks really kind of hit their stride at the end of this year.
Yeah.
So I feel like, and maybe things would have played out differently if they didn't have that streak at the end of the year. They might not have paid Mike Evans. They definitely wouldn't have paid Baker.
That's a great point.
So, but they had that good winning streak down the stretch, won a playoff game, almost beat the Lions. So I think that led them to say, hey, we've got a decent team in place. Let's keep the core together and see what we can do with it and run it back. And I think that's what they did. And just being in, and maybe even a big thought of that was they're in such a weak division. If you just keep the core there, don't mix things up too much, you got a good chance of winning it again.
Yeah. I mean, eventually that core is going to get old.
Oh, it will. But you can run it down. I think Mike Evans' deal is only 2 years. So
yeah,
you can
2014 draft class. So he's going into his 11th season.
Yeah.
He's getting up there. But receivers have longevity, so not necessarily a bad thing. Baker Mayfield is what makes everything run.
Yeah.
And who would have thought we'd be sitting here saying that Baker Mayfield pretty much inherited Tom Brady's team with a few subtractions and then would have a better season with that team.
Right. Yeah, they got one win better.
Yeah, and then won a playoff game.
Right. Yeah. Now, one thing that's going to be really interesting, though, is if Baker regresses not having Dave Canales there.
Yes, and that brings us full circle with the whole thing.
Right, because maybe you see a few wins go to the Panthers now that they have the offensive coordinator.
Oh, there's a little wishful thinking. All right.
Now, I think that Baker can do it because we saw him be able to run the Rams offense pretty well. And that's a different offensive coordinator. Really, the only offense he didn't run well was the Panthers offense. I'm sure Browns fans could say, hey, he wasn't that great on the Browns. I think that there were other things at play there. I don't think Kevin Stefanski liked him that much.
He lost the locker room too. They didn't like him. They didn't like all the progressive commercials. They're like, we're not at home with Baker Mayfield. He doesn't live here. Baker, this is the big year for him. I mean, do you live into that contract, or is this like a Blake Bortles moment?
Yeah,
where you got your second contract and then oof, you just sink. Baker's way better than Blake Bortles. Baker is a much better quarterback than Blake Bortles.
Baker Mayfield's also a lot tougher than Blake Bortles. He has an intangible to him, I feel, and he's able to rally teams around him. So, and I think the Bucks did rally around him last year.
Yeah, and that time with the Rams is what sold me on Baker, and that's why I picked the Bucks to win that division. They were big underdogs. They were plus 750 in most sports books to win the division. Worst odds.
I went the Saints. That was a mistake.
Yeah, I was like, the Saints have no chance. So I was on Tampa last year, and it was kind of risky, but I'm like, they have just as good of a chance as everybody.
Yeah,
and their odds are good.
Not Carolina.
Not Carolina. Carolina had better odds.
Yeah.
So yeah. So with the Bucks, I see this team probably finishing 10-7 or 11-6. I'll just go with 11-6 to have them definitively ahead of the Atlanta. But
Yeah, I say floor is 9-8, ceiling is 12, 12-5, and I would put them at 11-6.
yeah, the Bucks they're the one team in this division that could really make some noise like the whole season.
Yeah, yeah,
team
and they
such
could
as-
they could have some big wins. I think, especially with their defense playing well, they could upset some teams. So
Yeah. Great. Well, that's a good overview of the NFC South today. We're excited to see games start to kick off. We'll be going over a different division each week, so make sure to tune in for when your team, it's their turn to be covered. Also, remember, put a comment below. It's free. It costs nothing, and you get put into a drawing for a random blaster box. So leave a comment below. Remember to like the stream, give us a subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Breaking the Plane podcast.